Hi, I'm Peter Haddock and welcome to another edition of the Content with Media podcast. This podcast is supported by Leica Geosystems, a 3D machine control and surveying specialist. Today, I've got a really special guest, Dave Stollery, and Dave is from Perkins Engines. I've been asked a lot about the industry, about Stage 5. What do we do now we've got Stage 5 equipment? Why should we actually get new equipment with Stage 5? What it's all about and how it's going to impact the industry for the better. I don't know enough about that information, but fortunately working for an engine manufacturer and also focusing in his role with the rental industry that is the biggest purchaser of equipment in this sector is Dave. So basically, Dave, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background and then we'll talk about Stage 5, what people to look out for and all the different things. And I'm hopefully going to get some hints and tips from you as well that they can do. So Dave, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks Peter. Great to be with you today. As you mentioned, my name's Dave Stollery. I'm the Business Development Manager for Perkins Engine Company. And the specific area I focus on is on our Perkins Rental Support Program, working directly with rental customers, our OEM customers, and importantly for our distributors in and around Europe, Africa, Middle East. And so it's a really interesting time, as you mentioned, as we embark upon Stage 5 and the conversations we're having across those industries is really fascinating at this point in time.
Dave, we'll start by understanding what Stage 5 is. There's some confusion out there as to what Stage 5 actually means and why it's here. Can you give us an outline of why it's here and what it's all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background has been predominantly in diesel engines and working for diesel engine manufacturers. And over the course of the last 20-25 years, we've seen progressive improvements in diesel emissions and tailpipe emissions. So, way back when we had the stereotypical view of black plumes of smoke coming from tailpipes of diesel-powered vehicles and off-highway equipment, but now that's not even commonplace. And that's as a direct result of these progressive improvements into diesel tailpipe emissions. And over the last 20-25 years, we've been mandated by European legislation to improve tailpipe emissions for very critical and important reasons of improving the environment in which we live. And so every 4 or 5 years, there's a greater improvement of measurement of diesel vehicles. And for the industrial segment, we measure that by stages. So in Europe, we are now at Stage 5, and so that suggests that there have been 4 previous iterations, and each improvement or release of legislation cuts significantly the areas of diesel emissions that contribute to pollution. And now we're at Stage 5. It's much, much more cleaner than the previous. I think it's a 90% reduction since the previous Stage 3 and Stage 4 emission cycle. So these are very, very aggressive targets for the likes of Perkins as a diesel engine manufacturer to actually meet. But we're not alone. Every diesel engine manufacturer that participates in Europe or wishes to has to meet these very critical standards of diesel tailpipe emissions.
And so when we look at it at Stage 5 now, I've been speaking to people and some of them say, actually, when you're looking at a Stage 5 engine in quite a polluted area, like an inner city area, actually the air that comes out of the exhaust is cleaner than the stuff that goes in, which I don't quite believe that, Dave, but people are quoting that kind of thing to me because it's not just the engine, is it? There's an after-treatment process. And can you explain how that works? And is it true? Can we have cleaner air?
Yes, the irony is, whether it's actually proven or not, but that concept actually is being spoke about, that operating a Stage 5 piece of equipment in a city can actually act as a mobile air cleaner, funnily enough. But the main constituents that are being measured is particulate matter, and effectively the engine design now has a significant after treatment element. So that's after the exhaust comes out of the engine, it then flows through a further process of cleaning up particulate matter that's carried over from the combustion process, but also NOx, which is obviously a harmful emittant as well. So we have such devices placed on the engine that directly manage the filtration of particulates, but also the control of harmful emissions such as NOx, oxides of nitrogen, through selective catalytic reduction processes. So there's lots of technology and chemistry, funnily enough, that goes into managing these tailpipe emissions. And again, there are far better educated people than myself that go into the finite details of how we do that. But it's all to control the emissions coming out of the tailpipe in a very controlled manner and in very controlled environment. So yeah, it's fascinating to see the amount of technology that now gets applied to diesel engines to make them a much, much cleaner form of energy.
And I think for me, what's really interesting is now we've also got, thanks to the team at CSAR, we've also got the emissions certification verification as such that shows people that they have got a really latest emission machine. So that is now a visible sticker that goes next to the CSAR identification that stops the theft of that machine to actually show somebody what's inside. It doesn't say necessarily the manufacturer, but it says the capability of this engine. Now that's actually become a really important factor in people identifying whether they have the right equipment coming onto site in low emission zones, for example. How important is it been to educate people and have that verification and the visualization of that?
Yes, you're right, Peter. Again, something that is part of my role is working with rental companies to help them understand the benefits of Stage 5 and how that can improve efficiencies in their workplace, because often, you'll be more than familiar, our engines are tucked way, way deep in the darkest depths of a machine, not even visible, and sometimes you have to look very, very closely to where they've actually fitted an engine. So it's not apparent from the outside necessarily what emission levels are being operated to. So public perception is a key factor. You know, when these machines are operating in urban areas, you know, and let's not forget that the emission standard also takes account of noise. You know, we are very critical to make sure our engines conform not just to a tailpipe emission, but to a noise emission criteria as well. So, you know, public awareness of what Stage 5 is about. Branding of equipment is very important, that people can then associate with the cleanest possible technology that's in existence when they're operating in urban areas on such residential projects. You know, there's many major infrastructure programs in operation in the UK now. Many are mandating the cleanest technology available to operate on those sites. So that draws people's awareness to the fact that the industry is doing its utmost to contribute to a clean and healthy environment.
And that is really important as we move forward because, you know, we have got our net zero goals and aims. National Highways, who I spoke to just yesterday about an innovation project that they're doing, they're really looking at how we can get on that road to delivering net zero. And I think, you know, Stage 5 is one of the important steps of doing that. The other thing, Dave, which a lot of people are talking to me about, and again, it's really confusing for me and for them, is what goes into the engine. So we're talking HVO fuels, Dave. Everybody's saying it's HVO ready, it's HVO compliant, it's HVO stuff. You know, there's these names flying around everywhere that says this piece of equipment is HVO, you know. And first of all, Dave, for the audience, you know, I like to ask the simple questions. One, what is HVO? And two, how can we say, yes, that machine is ready for it? And are there certain grades and things like that that we need to look out for? Because not one fuel is the same as another, is it? Can you really help me out here, Dave, with this one?
Yeah, so you're right. We've seen, as a manufacturer, a lot of interest now in renewables. Renewables is very much a topic that's being discussed within the industry, and fuels is part of that discussion. Renewable fuels, so not reliant on fossil fuels all the time. And so HVO, hydrogenated vegetable oils, is one type of renewable, sustainable fuel that can be used. And again, we're talking actively with rental industries because, as you mentioned at the outset, rental represents one of the single largest fleet owners of diesel-powered equipment in the world. And what we mean by that is when you look at the scale of some of the major rental companies that operate not just in the UK, but across the continent of Europe and then globally, these organisations have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of diesel-powered equipment part of their asset profile. And so we're talking to them because they're being confronted with all of these, let's call them alternate fuels, whether it be a gas to liquid, a biofuel, HVO that we've just talked about. And they really need to understand what the impact is on their assets, their prized possessions. Without their assets, they don't or are unable to operate efficiently or effectively. So they're really keen to talk to us about what are the impacts on some of these fuels. And in truth, you're right, as with anything, these fuels have to be certified. It's no longer a case of creating a cocktail in the garden shed, so to speak, but they have to be very finely regulated. So there's certain certifications around fuel grades and content. Biofuels, again, there's a standard around the bio element that's available to make our fuels sustainable. But you mentioned HVO. That again is a very topical fuel at the moment, because even for non-stage 5 equipment, so stage 3, stage 3B, we class that as a drop-in fuel. What do I mean by drop-in? It means that the Perkins, we don't need any external changes to the engine. It's compatible with the engine today. But the significant benefits are it can have an up to 80% reduction in carbon emissions, period. The minute you apply this fuel, it's been proven that when an engine runs on this fuel type, you can reduce your carbon impact by up to 80%. So that's a huge incentive for when you have rental companies that are wanting to do the right thing, net zero, carbon efficient, reduce their footprint on a working site. And so that brings with it significant benefits when they can automatically switch their fueling regime overnight to these type of fuels. But there's many different fuels available in the marketplace. But again, working to a certified standard, working with the likes of Perkins, we can help navigate operators through that discussion on what fuels can be used.
And it's a little bit similar to where we see at a petrol station in the UK, where you said you've got your premium products, you've got your less supermarket-led fuels, so they actually perform in different ways. And so, Dave, I know one of the things that really is interesting, I came to Perkins and had a look around the whole factory in Peterborough recently, is actually how you think about the asset itself, and what fuel you put in is important, what other things like hydraulic oils and things like that are important. And it's all about optimizing the performance for each drop. And I think that's also where stage 5 comes in, isn't it? Because we're not just talking about stage 5 has been delivered just to reduce the emissions and tick a box. Stage 5 has obviously now got an opportunity to reduce the overall use of fuel, or not necessarily reduce the amount of fuel used, get a greater performance on optimize the amount of fuel that you're using in order to get the most out of each drop. Can you tell me how that works and what has been happening with the design of these new engines that's enabling those, that drop to do a lot more?
Yeah, and again, we were delighted you had a chance to see some of the facilities we have on site in Peterborough. And that's very much part of the work we do with our customers, the OEMs. So we have a lot of facility capability where we're not just operating to reach a tailpipe emission standard. We work very closely, to your point, in daily improvements in performance. As I mentioned, when you look at a piece of rental equipment or construction equipment nowadays, it's very difficult to find where the engine actually is because machines have got much more smaller, more compact for closer working environments or tighter working environments. So, when you think about residential or some of the work that these machines or the areas they're expected to operate in becoming very tight, machine size in itself has come down. And us as an engine manufacturer challenged with finding a space to put the engine, and don't forget now the after treatment, because it all has to fit in a very confined space. So what we've seen now is actually engine displacement has come down. So the engine sizes have reduced, but actually as a result of these technologies, stage 5, it's enabled us to increase performance without compromising on engine displacement. We call it optimization, where we've increased the power but necessarily reduced the size of the engine. So that means we can get much more efficient packages into much smaller machines, but without compromising performance or the machine ability to do a piece of work. And so if you think about that then has dramatic effect on gaining even more efficiency from a smaller engine, but getting greater fuel benefit as well. So we, as you mentioned, extracting every ounce of energy from the fuel that we can to create a much greater, more efficient product.
And what's interesting as well, Dave, we've seen things getting smaller, but what we have done is also seen a lot of attachments coming into the market, things like tilt rotators and, a lot of specialist attachments that really need a lot of hydraulic power to work. So we're talking about here, you're saying smaller engines, more efficient, more productive, but also they've got to pump out all of that hydraulic power now that you might find a much smaller machine using a tilt rotator with another attachments on it as well that needs that power. So that has changed in the market as well, and that impacts the kind of choices that rental companies are making on their fleet and how they can actually say, is this fleet the right equipment to buy now to actually run to the demands of our customer as well, isn't it?
Yeah, well, again, that's one of the benefits of stage 5 and working not just with the OEM partners that we have and customers, but also having that greater in-depth knowledge and relationship with rental companies, because it helps us develop these newer, greater, better technologies for the future. So having that relationship with rental enables us to understand better some of the factors that rental companies consider. But interestingly enough, as we move into stage 5, part of the aspect is that we want the engines to work that much more harder. If you remember, I talked about after treatment. Well, part of the chemical reaction is operated or created through heat generated from the engine to make it run that bit more efficiently. And so loading the engine isn't necessarily seen as a negative. In fact, we're promoting that we use the engine's utilized power opportunity up to 70 to 80%. So we're not expecting machines to be stood idling for hours on end. We actually want them to be working. And that's where we talk to rental companies about the greater efficiencies of machines in operation. So with increased demand on hydraulics, funnily enough, that absolutely helps our engines run that bit more efficiently.
That's actually quite fascinating. You'd have thought that to do that, they would actually, have to have more power and use more fuel, but actually running them more efficiently with the fact that you're adding in that hydraulic power demand is fascinating, because that's totally unexpected. And I guess from my perspective, you've also talked about this way in which, where is the engine, on these machines. So it must be more difficult for you now to kind of model where to put the engines and things like that. And how are you as an engine manufacturer to other OEMs like JCB, for example, that I visited recently, are actually using the technologies that are available to work closer with the OEM to fit an engine in, because they want everything to be smaller. But, you've got to figure out where it all goes now, haven't you? New designs are coming into the industry all the time. So how does that work?
So we have a very close working relationship, collaboration, partnership with our customers. And it's not just us producing engines that suit our manufacturing capabilities. Part of that relationship and collaboration is to make sure that we package the engine, but it's fit for production for our customers. So we spend a great deal of time before we even, lift a spanner or go to put an engine in a product to then find it doesn't quite fit how we want. We do a lot of time and effort with our customers to model the machine type, where the best place to locate the engine. And let's not forget, there's all associated components. You spoke about hydraulics. Where's the transmission going to be placed? Where are the hydraulic pumps to operate the various attachments? Where do we package that most conveniently? Equally important is for in-life service. So again, it's no point burying an engine in the deepest, darkest depths of a machine to then find every time you want to service it, because service is equally important for the successful lifetime of that engine and the machine, that we make it accessible for service operations. So all of these factors come into the equation when we work with our client customers to make sure that we have the most optimized installation for ease of manufacture, but also serviceability when that machine enters its useful life. And so that's very much part of the consideration we take.
I think that's quite interesting, because it moves on to the thing I was going to want to talk about, Dave, as well. And you're talking about the rental industry, right? So we're talking about big fleets of equipment with engines in it, and fundamentally you want to have the same engine ultimately in the whole fleet of equipment you're doing, so that you understand that particular engine, that product. But the fundamentals of keeping a stage 5 engine running is, I've seen the press releases and the talk of the industry, extended service hours and things like that. So the componentry has changed, and if you can explain to me in a moment how that's been made possible. How have we managed to go from 500 to 1,000 hours in some circumstances? And then you've got to understand as an industry that we are short of engineers. We are short of people to look after these machines. So again, how are we playing into that to make it easier for the rental company? So a couple of key questions there, Dave, for you.
So again, with anything, we as an industry have developed our processes, our capabilities and technologies with emission standards in sight, and with that has brought on a great deal of technology advances. Again, we think about fluid technology. As you would have seen in your tour, it's not just the mechanical technology or designing fuel injectors to manage thousands of bar of pressure of injecting fuel. There's a lot of tight tolerances that go around fuel injection, for example. But in order for that injector to operate tens of thousands of hours over its life cycle, you need to manage your fluid. So diesel fluid has progressed significantly. The qualities of fuels that we're now seeing available is critical to stage 5 operating optimally. So ultra low sulfur diesels are now a requirement. We've seen the introduction of diesel emission fluid, AdBlue or urea as some may know it. Again, the qualities of fluids being introduced into engines to make them work efficiently and at their best has seen tremendous advances in those technologies. Low ash oils, again, designed so that we don't take ash content or soot back into the engine. So again, a lot of time and effort and focus on fluid management comes into the operation of these machines. But fundamentally, it's not about trying to create, the Starship Enterprise. These machines have to operate in a day-to-day life cycle, and we need technicians and engineers to work on them and not be confronted with technologies that they're afraid to get involved with. So part of the process we go through is that step-by-step education, help technicians understand what each of these components is doing and why, because they all have a functional element within the engine. We talked about after treatment. There's a number of sensors around the after treatment systems that are there and meant to control the engine to the very best of its ability. And so we try and help in that education process when we start talking to our customers, not just rental, but any of our customers, about stage 5 technologies and how we can help contribute to the upkeep and maintenance of those machines for the best possible lifetime experience.
I think that's really important, because when we look at that, we're marrying machines now with technology. So you're talking about sensors, loads and loads of sensors plugged in, literally giving real-time information to the computer systems that are built into all of these new pieces of equipment, but also allowing that information to be broadcast through the GPS network to connected assets to actually say how healthy I am as a machine. Hey, over here, there's some trending data that something's happening. Spotting that through that cycle to say, actually, we've got a little bit of a problem coming maybe a few months down the line. So at the regular service interval, having that information there, then having a combination of that information with things like fluid sampling to actually say, look, we're combining the information that's coming off this part of it, we're combining the fluid sampling, and we're showing that there's a tiny little bit of metal within that fluid. That links to this trending data that we're seeing. That means, guys, when you are next doing a service, look at this, look at that, to do the preventative maintenance piece. And again, that's an educational process as well. Just like we're looking at 3D machine control, the likes of Leica Geosystems, that is a part that people and the operators have got to see, but yours is a part, is actually the same kind of technology in the way in which we're talking, is the mechanics. How are you helping people then do that and make sure that they're fundamentally able to look at that information and not just data lines to see that that is what they need to do?
Yeah, so again, you touched on another important aspect of our offering is, fluid sampling does exactly what you spoke about, analyzes the oils coming through the engine or the fluids being introduced into the engine to make sure that they are absolutely compatible, or that early indicator if there's a suspected issue. Obviously hope there isn't, but it's part of the process and package offering that we are enabled to analyse those oils, those fluids into the engine, and in some cases guide an operator that the way in which they operate their machine, based on the analysis of fluids and oils we take, they may not need to service the machine as frequently. Again, we have guidelines, and that's exactly what they are, guidelines on operation. But in certain circumstances, operators are using their machines slightly differently, and so it may mean that it could be offered as a cost saving not to service that machine as frequently, providing that we carry out that routine fluid sampling activity just to act as a guidance on expected life cycles.
And Dave, I think that's all adds up to the biggest subject for rental companies right now, and that is sustainability. So if you are using all this technology, if you've got stage 5, if you've got new equipment, if it's using less or doing more per drop, then actually it's becoming more of a sustainability benefit to the whole of the industry for you to use that equipment. And this is, again, where we come back to training. So having that training for people that are looking after the equipment from your team that's looking after the rental community is vital, just as the training is for operators to use the technologies like I've just mentioned of 3D machine control. All of it works when we've got people and working with the plant and understanding how it all works and how it all comes together. So, Dave, I want to wrap this up, and I want to talk about, how we go forward. So I want to understand how we go forward to make sure with the rollout of all these stage 5 engines and equipment that have the engine in it is going to be successful, and what we need to do as an industry, and top tips, in fact, Dave, of what to look out for from you when you are doing that rollout as a rental business, and where should those things happen and when?
Yeah, well, again, you touched on another topic close to my heart, which is sustainability. Again, I had the pleasure of being at the European Rental Association event several months ago, and every workshop, every topic of discussion was about sustainability. And it challenged me in the role I perform within rental to really think about what is our sustainability message to such an important industry sector that we stay closely aligned to. And it's really surprising when you look at the way we go about developing, building, producing engines and carrying them through their life cycle with rental, that we have a very clear sustainability message. And that's evident even from where we produce our engines and the sustainability responsibilities we have as an engine manufacturer. So that's a whole nother topic that we could get into. But you're right, it's about understanding the industry segment and its needs. We service many different areas of the industry. We're an industrial engine manufacturer after all, so we have many sectors and applications that we cover. So, part of my role is making sure that the products we produce fit the application that goes into rental. And working with rental companies, I'm in that privileged position that I've got many great contacts and industry colleagues within rental that help us develop those products to meet the needs of the industry. So, even our role in developing engines and solutions to meet the future needs of rental is critical. Talking about sustainability, talking about power density, how the machine will be used in real life, collaborating with our OEM partners and customers and rental to design and create solutions for the future. That's all part of the business we're in, making sure that we have that longevity. Talking about when the machine is in service, how does it get managed and controlled at a branch level? So connecting our distributors that are best placed in territory, remembering that many of the companies we're working with span the entire European continent. Having a distributor in territory that talks the same language, that understands the culture of doing business in that area, knowing the geography and location, the types of machines they're operating, enriches our relationship with the end user customer because they have a partner on which they can rely. And so this is very much, we talk about collaboration, we talk about optimization, but we also talk about creating a harmony within all of the industries we serve. And that's no more true than with rental, to be honest. We want to be there at the point of need. Again, it's only how we deal with a problem we get measured on how successful we are. And that's what we're instilling within our whole network, is working closely with rental, with our branches, through our distributors, making sure they have a reliable partner to call upon at the point of need, at the point of service.
And Dave, I think, what is really exciting is we are now seeing a very, very big rollout of the whole setup of stage 5 engines throughout small, medium and large sizes equipment. We're seeing billions of pounds spent in the industry right now on all of those levels of equipment as well. And it's great to see us actually realising the benefits of the stage 5 engine, not just from an emissions perspective or a productivity perspective, but on an ability to create smaller, more efficient, more powerful machines that fundamentally use less, but do, in fact, sometimes more than the previous equivalent can do in a smaller package. And all of it adds up to a much greater sustainability message. Getting it right is the important bit. Getting people to make sure that they've got the right support, getting people to make sure their engineers understand how to read the information that's coming through and how to act. And then actually, when we all pull that together, things will last longer, have longer life cycles, and then fundamentally, we won't have to keep changing the fleets as often anyway, because they're more efficient and they're more productive, and therefore they can last a bit longer. So, Dave, thanks very much for talking to me today. Fascinating to understand a bit about Stage 5, the HVO element, the training, and all these stuff that goes into it. I hope you've enjoyed, folks. This edition of the Content with Media podcast certainly answered a lot of questions that people have been asking me. And if you do need to get in touch with Dave, how can they do that?
Well, we have the Perkins site. I'm available to be contacted directly. So again, happy to receive any feedback through your channel, Peter, and it'll be great to get in touch with more rental companies. We're always available on site. As I say, perkins.com. I'm available through as a contact me resource. So happy to do that.
Thanks ever so much again, Dave, for all your insights. It's been a pleasure to have you on the Content with Media podcast, folks. And this edition is kindly supported by my great friends at Leica Geosystems. They're the 3D machine control and surveying specialists who actually can help your machine actually do a lot more, especially if it's a stage 5 one. Thanks very much. And thanks to you, the listeners, for spending some time with me today. And until the next time, goodbye.